In 1840, 19 years after his death in captivity on St. Helena, the remains of the Emperor Napoleon were repatriated to Paris. The public funeral created a surge of patriotism. As the years passed, the harsh realities of Napoleon's wars were fading into romantic memory. And so it was that in 1858, a group of veterans of the Grand Army who visited Paris on May the 5th each year to commemorate the death of Napoleon started to think how they might preserve the glories of their youth for future generations. Commercial photography using the gyrope and the ambrope was taking off. Studios had sprung up around Paris. They sold portrait photos to the middle classes to be used as keepsakes. The old soldiers, all now in their 60s or 70s, went to a studio in full uniform and posed. This is Miss Yuma, a cavalryman of the 8th Dragoon Regiment. And this is Moulev, a sergeant in the 2nd Regiment of Engineers. He may well have assisted at Waterloo in the attack on Hujar Ali Saint. Several of the veterans, whose figures weren't what they once were, must have got their tailor to make adjustments to their old dress uniforms. This is Quartermaster Sergeant Delino, a mounted chasseur of the elite Imperial Guard, Napoleon's shock troops. Mazan served with the 2nd Lancers. Because of their uniform, they were known as the Red Lancers, or crawfishes. They were a light cavalry unit in the Imperial Guard. Miss Dreyers also served in a 2nd Light Horse Lances at Waterloo. They repeatedly charged the English infantry squares at great loss of life. The veteran corps of the Imperial Guard were a prestigious unit known as the Old Guard. They were known for their loyalty and combat experience. This is Sergeant Terrier. The Old Guard's towering bearskin hats were recognizable across the battlefield. After Waterloo, British Guards units copied it, and they still use it for ceremonial occasions. Grenadier Berg was also with the Old Guard. Renowned for their courage, discipline, and unwavering loyalty to Napoleon, they were known as the Immortals. Napoleon told them fondly, "You have been my constant companions on the road to honor and glory." At Waterloo, their general is said to have boasted, "The Guard dies, but it does not surrender." The Mamelukes were another unit of the Imperial Guard. These light cavalry troops were created during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign. Vernice Ducel served with them from 1813 to 1815. This is Ms. Dupont, Galère for the 1st, a light cavalry unit. Like the other veterans, he boasted on his chest the St. Helen Medal. It was issued the year before to all veterans of the wars of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Empire. Some of the veterans chose to pose in the studio with furniture. This is Miss Vitry of the Departmental Guard, the equivalent of today's National Guard in the U.S. This old veteran appears to have lost his right eye, perhaps in battle. Miss Yoya served with the 24th Mounted Chasseur Regiment. He was a Sciolier of the Legion of Honor. The medal recognized exceptional service to France. Miss Schmidt of the 2nd Mounted Chasseur Regiment of the Imperial Guard. The Chasseurs provided personal escort to Napoleon. Schmidt wears a nightcap-style forage hat, normally used for fatigue duties. His original Grand Acco had perhaps deteriorated. The blurring on one or two of the photographs suggests the difficulty the old man had in staying still for several seconds while the plates were exposed. This is Miss in his grand uniform of the 2nd Regiment of House. The Hussars were like cavalry, known for their characteristic flamboyant uniform. The braided jacket was called a doll man, and worn nonchalant over one shoulder was a Furlan pelisse. This is Quartermaster Fabry, at the 1st Regiment of Hussars. The Hussars were used as reconnaissance troops and raiders, although it may actually have originated among the men themselves, Napoleon reportedly said. ASR, who does not drink is not a Hussar. R, who does not gamble is not a Hussar. And a Hussar who does not make love is not a Hussar, but he who does all three is the perfect Hussar. And this is Miss of the 7th House would have served under the famous cavalry commander Lassell, known for his flamboyant style and the quote, "R who is not dead by 30 is a blard." Mayer would have experienced both the regiment's glory years under Lassell and the challenging final campaigns that ultimately led to Napoleon's defeat. These are all men born in the 18th century. There are no other equivalent to these amazing historic photographic records. However, in 1880 in London, 5 surviving British veterans of the Waterloo campaign at their retirement home at the Royal Military Hospital, Chelsea, had their photos taken. Rather than their original uniforms, They wore the traditional outfits of the so-called Chelsea pensioners that dated back to the early 18th century and that is still worn today. By the late 19th century, these Waterloo men, as these veterans were nicknamed, had become local celebrities. Astonishingly, in 1912, the last remaining Russian veteran of the Napoleonic Wars was photographed. It was claimed he was 114 years old.